So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what the local time is for you. I always love seeing those little time zone postcards scroll by. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You plant your boots deeper into the grit, the dust puffing up in lazy swirls, faintly tinted pink as though even the air has been painted by iron rust. Mars' soil really does contain iron oxides, the same stuff that stains old shovels and forgotten bikes on Earth, only here it's the entire world. You tilt your head back and notice the sky isn't bright blue, but instead a pale salmon hue, almost as though someone's been tinkering with the photo filters. Astronauts once described Earth's skies as full-volume stereo, and Mars's skies as soft AM radio, flat, thin, a little sad, but with their own haunting beauty. As you stroll, your eyes catch onto patterns in the sand, faint ripples sculpted by winds that have no trees to rustle, no seas to stir, just air so thin it couldn't even fill a balloon back home. And yet those winds carry power enough to shape dunes the size of skyscrapers, power enough to bury entire rovers if given a few centuries of patience. Historians still argue whether ancient floods or atmospheric collapse first robbed this planet of its once thicker air, but either way, what's left behind feels more like an archaeological site than a world still alive. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. If you ever try to jog here, your stride would fling you forward in long, floaty arcs, since Mars' gravity is only about a third of Earth's. Great for moon bounce calisthenics, terrible for trying to look cool, you'd basically resemble a toddler on a trampoline. Still, the idea of bouncing across rust-red dunes with stars peeking out behind you has its own kind of elegance. As you breathe, well, pretend to breathe, the silence grows almost aggressive. There are no birds, no crickets, not even the faint hiss of distant traffic. Just you and the desert. A soundscape so blank it almost feels louder than noise itself. Your thoughts wander to history. The ancient Egyptians tracked Mars with naked eyes thousands of years ago, noting its blood-red hue. They called it Horus the Red, tying it to gods of conflict. Across the Mediterranean, Greek observers took the same wandering dot and handed it to Ares, the god of war. Every ancient culture seemed to agree this place looked ominous. Imagine if they'd known you'd be walking here someday with nothing more than a thermal suit and a stubborn streak. The desert stretches out in every direction, but something nags at you. It's not just endless wasteland. On the horizon, a faint glint, like metal catching starlight, winks at you. It doesn't move, but your eyes keep flicking back to it, the way you might glance at headlights cresting a hill far off. Whatever it is, it doesn't belong to dust storms and basalt cliffs, and while you can't yet make out details, you can feel the presence of the Atlas anomaly, something modern, or maybe not so modern, squatting quietly in the Martian stillness. The thought makes you chuckle softly, because if there's one consistent thread in human history, is that we can't resist building things in places we're not supposed to. From Roman aqueducts across deserts to polar research stations dangling at the edge of ice sheets, we just love the architectural equivalent of saying, "Bet you I can." Maybe Atlas is humanity's latest bet, just built a few million miles further from the nearest coffee shop, but for now, you take your time. The ground crunches under your steps, the sky blushes with alien twilight, and the red desert hums with a silence older than Earth itself. The anomaly can wait. For the moment, you're content to wander in the rust-red dust, imagining each pebble as a bead in the planet's endless memory. You keep moving across the sand, that faint gleam on the horizon refusing to disappear. The more you try to glance away, the more your eyes are dragged back toward it, like a mischievous star that insists on photobombing your walk. It isn't natural. The way the light shivers off its edges suggests angles, sharpness, some kind of geometry that Mars itself never carved. Rock makes jagged cliffs, dunes make soft waves, but this looks like a wall catching the low sun, and painted along one side, almost absurdly clear against the rusty dust, is a marking, 3I/Atlas. Your first instinct is to laugh. Of all the places in the solar system, who decided to slap a bureaucratic-sounding project name onto the side of a Martian installation? It sounds less like a mysterious alien temple, and more like the kind of thing you'd see on a shipping container docked in New Jersey. And yet, here it is, shimmering under a sky where the sun is nothing more than a pale coin. You squint, trying to make sense of the structure's scale, It could be the size of a small building, or it could be a massive fortress many kilometers away. With no trees, no familiar houses, perspective plays tricks on you. Mars is notorious for that. Endless horizons that flatten your sense of distance until even mountains look like bumps on the carpet. The closer you walk, the more you wonder who built it. You remember how in 1965, NASA's Mariner 4 zipped past Mars and snapped the first close-up images, grainy black and white and depressingly crater-pocked. Many scientists at the time sighed and said, well, guess there's nothing alive here. But fast forward, and here you are, staring at something decidedly alive in design, if not in biology. Historians still argue whether Cold War rivalries sparked secret bases on extraterrestrial soil. It sounds like conspiracy theory candy. But considering the era's appetite for outdo the other guy at literally everything, it's not completely out of the question. And here's the quirky tidbit of the night. During the 1970s, an actual group of scientists and futurists toyed with the idea of hiding deep space probes as true functions by giving them deliberately boring names. Because as one wit put it, nothing classified is ever called something as dramatic as Firestorm. It's usually called the Dishwasher Safety Program. So, seeing 3i/Atlas stenciled across Martian sand starts to feel suspiciously on brand. Maybe boring names are the ultimate disguise. You pause, dust coating your boots, the low Martian wind brushing past like someone softly dragging tissue paper over your helmet. The structure grows clearer, not smooth like a polished dome, not rugged like a basalt cliff, but a kind of hybrid. A squat blockiness softened by sand drifts curling at its base. It feels as though it's been here a while, long enough for storms to scuff its surface, but not so long that it's vanished under the dunes, like a stubborn tenant refusing to be evicted by the planet's weather. You lean into the thought, perhaps 3i/Atlas isn't just some physical place. Maybe it's part of a bigger puzzle. An entire program strung between Earth and Mars, stretching cables of secrecy and speculation across the void. The name Atlas itself makes your mind wander. In Greek myth, Atlas was condemned to hold the sky on his shoulders, eternally bearing weight. Is that what this thing is doing? Holding up some metaphorical sky for humanity, carrying the burden of experiments too heavy to reveal back home? Or is it simpler? Just a literal atlas, a map in physical form, charting something we aren't supposed to see yet. A soft laugh escapes you as you imagine a Martian tour guide popping out, clipboard in hand. Welcome to the 3i/Atlas complex. Please remain on the designated pathways, and yes, the cafeteria closes at 5. You wouldn't even be surprised if the vending machine only takes Earth quarters. The joke doesn't completely hide the unease crawling up your spine, though. Because jokes aside, something very real is sitting in front of you. The sun drops lower, shadows stretching like taffy across the plain. The letters on the side of the structure glow faintly in the fading light, almost phosphorescent, as if the paint itself has been engineered to resist the planet's slow erosion. That attention to detail suggests intention, and intention means someone, or something, was here recently enough to care. As you step closer, you recall how explorers throughout history stumbled on ruins in deserts back on Earth. Think of Heinrich Schliemann brushing sand off the stones of Troy, or the accidental rediscovery of Petra's rose-red facades by a disguised Swiss traveller in 1812. In every case, people expected emptiness and found instead a story already written into the stones. Maybe that's what you're walking into now, a Martian Petra, except instead of temples to forgotten gods, you've got something labelled in stenciled bureaucraties. A sudden gust kicks up, dust stinging your visor like tiny pellets. For a moment, the anomaly fades behind a curtain of storm. Mars loves its drama. One second the sky is pink tranquility, the next it's swirling with copper-coloured chaos. When the haze clears, the structure stands steady, patient, like it has no intention of going anywhere. You do, though. Your feet carry you forward, crunch by crunch, drawn toward the unanswered question painted on its side. The letters loom closer now. 3i/Atlas. You can practically run your glove over the grooves of the paint. The surface beneath feels metallic, cold, even through your insulated touch. Not quite steel, not quite stone, something hybrid again. You realise you've stopped breathing properly, not because the oxygen tank isn't working, but because the mystery feels so large it's pressing down on your chest. Whatever Atlas is, it doesn't want to be ignored, and you, curious, restless, possibly reckless, you don't intend to ignore it. You rest your palm on the cold flank of the Atlas structure, but before you dare press further, your mind drifts backward, farther than rockets, farther than satellites, farther even than telescopes. Because long before anyone painted 3I/Atlas on the side of a Martian wall, human beings were already obsessed with this reddish wanderer in the night sky. Imagine yourself under a velvet black Mesopotamian sky, the year somewhere around 700 BCE. No light pollution, no airplane trails, just an endless dome of stars whispering down at you. To the Babylonians, who kept some of the earliest surviving astronomical records, Mars wasn't just a pretty dot, it was Nergal, a deity tangled with war, plague, and fire. They tracked its wandering motion carefully, inscribing its path into clay tablets. Those tablets survive today, cracked and dusty, but clear enough that you can still follow their mathematical notations. You picture a scribe squinting at the heavens, dipping a reed stylus into wet clay, and jotting down where that little red bead rose tonight. In a way, they were the first to start building humanity's spreadsheet of Mars. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians treated those records more as mystical omens or as purely practical celestial calendars. It's probably both, because when your gods are also your physics, keeping track of Mars means keeping track of destiny. That's a lot of responsibility for one planet, especially one that now looks like it could barely hold together a decent picnic. The desert wind hisses faintly at your side, almost like those ancient voices are carrying forward, tugging at your sleeve. You think about how cultures across the world all gave Mars a similar fiery personality. To the Chinese, it was the fire star, a celestial warning signal. To the Egyptians, it was Horus the Red, his eye blazing across the night. To the Babylonians' cultural cousins, the Assyrians, it was a literal symbol of calamity. Apparently everyone looked up and agreed, yep, that one's trouble. And you wonder, if they could stand here with you now on the actual ground of that same fiery star, what would they think? Would they feel vindicated or completely bewildered at how boringly quiet the landscape seems? Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that ancient sky watchers may have actually noticed Mars's retrograde motion, the weird loop-the-loop it performs every couple of years when Earth overtakes it in orbit. Without modern astronomy, it must have looked like the planet was drunk, staggering backward before regaining its path. Whole mythologies could have spun out of that apparent hesitation, like a warrior retreating to regroup. And honestly, if Mars is the cosmic warrior, the idea of it occasionally tripping over its own sword feels on brand. You brush the dust off your glove, still tracing the letters on the structure, but your attention keeps flipping between present and past. Think of the Babylonians' careful observations, lines on clay that echo across millennia, and now here you are, touching an object labelled by some modern human hand, or maybe some modern machine's programming. The continuity is dizzying, from reed stylus to spray paint, all in service of the same obsession. This world that isn't ours yet keeps pulling us closer. The Martian sky deepens, shadows stretching long, and for a moment you can almost superimpose constellations from Earth's nights. That same dot that sent Mesopotamian scribes scrambling is now the very ground under your boots. Time collapses like a folded fan. Ancient astronomer, modern wanderer, and whoever etched Atlas here, all standing in one eternal stargaze. Another gust lifts, scattering a fine sheet of dust across the anomaly's surface. For a heartbeat, you imagine it as a cuneiform tablet itself, inscriptions carved into its metallic skin, waiting for you to decipher. Maybe that's the trick. Every era leaves its own language of Mars, and yours just happens to be in paint and alloys rather than clay and reeds. You chuckle, because if you ever told a Babylonian priest that Mars is mostly just cold desert with some frozen water locked underground, they'd probably squint, nod, and ask if the god Nergal is still mad. And honestly, you'd have to answer, well, the dust storms are a little cranky, so maybe yes. Your breath fogs faintly in your helmet. The sky above is already pricking with stars, and though the Atlas anomaly still waits, patient and solid, your thoughts keep spiraling back to those ancient dreamers who first dared to map a god. You're just the next dot on that same map, tracing the same restless orbit. You lean against the cold wall of Atlas, letting your mind drift even further forward from those Mesopotamian nights. After the Babylonians came the Greeks, and of course the Romans, each borrowing and reshaping the fiery dot in the sky into something that fit their own stories. When you stare upward now, seeing the pale coin of the sun slipping away, You can almost hear the clatter of bronze shields and the stomp of sandals echoing through time. To the Greeks, Mars was Ares, the god of war, chaos, and that uncomfortable dinner guest who always flips the table halfway through dessert. Unlike Athena, who represented strategy and clever tactics, Ares was pure blunt aggression. The planet's blood-red glow seemed the perfect avatar for his temper. But interestingly, while the Greeks treated Ares with caution, almost disdain, the Romans welcomed him with open arms. They renamed him Mars, made him a father of their people, and celebrated him with festivals every spring, complete with parades and sacrifices. Historians still argue whether the Romans' embrace of Mars was really about honouring war, or simply about rebranding the scarier Greek version into something more patriotic and useful. Here's a quirky tidbit. Mars wasn't only about war in Roman times, he also became linked to agriculture, which seems like a bizarre combination until you remember how ancient farmers viewed conflict and harvest as two sides of the same survival coin. You had to protect your fields just as fiercely as you fought for your borders. So yes, imagine trying to pitch that today. Our corporate logo represents both ploughing fields and stabbing enemies. Great synergy, right? The desert around you shifts colour with the falling light, the sand blushing deeper rust, the rocks hardening into jagged silhouettes. You picture Roman legions marching across this very plain, standards raised, chanting oaths to Mars as though this empty planet were their divine parade ground. In a way, it almost makes sense. The terrain is barren, unforgiving, demanding discipline, the perfect battlefield for a god of iron wills. But another thought creeps in. What if the ancients weren't entirely wrong in sensing a martial presence here? Modern scientists have uncovered evidence of catastrophic impacts, global floods, and volcanic outbursts that once shook Mars. Imagine Olympus Mons erupting, a volcano so massive it dwarfs anything Earth can produce. To ancient eyes, that would look exactly like the rage of a god. Maybe myth and geology aren't enemies at all. Maybe they're just different storytelling styles. You chuckle softly at the idea of Ares or Mars standing atop a Martian cliff glaring down at your spacesuit. He'd probably sneer at all the zippers and oxygen tanks, then ask why you're not carrying a spear. You'd have to explain that modern warfare looks more like pressing buttons from thousands of miles away. Not nearly as cinematic, though the consequences are just as grim. And in that moment, you might realise that humans haven't actually outgrown the war god at all. We've just updated his wardrobe. The letters 3I/Atlas glow faintly under the reddening sky, and the juxtaposition makes you grin. Here you are, standing beside a structure named after another titan from the Greek myths, Atlas, who held up the heavens, while the whole planet around you still resonates with the myth of Ares and Mars. It's as if human imagination refuses to let go of myth when it looks at this place. We keep wrapping Mars in gods and titans, because maybe we can't handle the idea of it being just dirt and silence. And silence it is. The wind dies down, leaving a stillness so absolute you can hear your own pulse. You close your eyes and let yourself drift into the ancient pageantry. Romans building temples to Mars Ultor, the Avenger, Greeks whispering prayers before battle, farmers planting seeds under his watchful eye. All of it tied to that red dot, the same one that now surrounds you as an entire world. When you open your eyes again, Atlas seems even larger, more imposing, as though it has absorbed the weight of those myths. Maybe that's its purpose, to be a bridge between old stories and new experiments, between divine warlords and scientific instruments. You can't tell yet, but you know the next step will take you closer, deeper into its mystery. The wall of Atlas at your back, you wander a little, just enough to give your legs some motion and your mind some air. The horizon still glows faintly salmon, but soon it will tip into darkness, and that feels appropriate, because the next chapter in Mars' human story is itself drenched in shadow and a misperception, the era of the so-called canals. Close your eyes, and suddenly you're in 1877, peering through a telescope in an Italian observatory. Astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli squints against the eyepiece, and what he thinks he sees are faint straight lines etched across the Martian surface. He calls them canali. In Italian, that simply means channels, natural formations, nothing necessarily artificial. But when his notes cross the language barrier into English, translators swap in the word canals. And with that single accidental mistranslation, Mars instantly gains an interplanetary workforce of imagined engineers. You smile at the absurdity. Historians still argue whether Schiaparelli's notes were misunderstood, or whether the public just wanted to misunderstand them. After all, the late 19th century was a golden age of engineering marvels: the Suez Canal, the Eiffel Tower, bus roads cutting through continents. Of course, people wanted to imagine that Mars had its own civil engineers, proudly irrigating deserts under alien skies. Here's the quirky tidbit. One of the loudest champions of these Martian canals was none other than Percival Lowell, a wealthy American who built his own observatory in Arizona specifically to study them. He sketched elaborate maps, crisscrosses of dark lines he insisted were artificial waterways constructed by a dying civilization to save their parched planet. Imagine him huddled over paper, connecting dots like a child tracing a maze, while the desert wind outside his observatory howled through cactus and dust. He believed so deeply that he published books, gave lectures, and basically became Mars' unofficial press agent. You wander along the Martian dunes, imagining what Lowell would think if he could step here with you now. He'd probably gasp, thrilled to see the canals firsthand, except you would have to awkwardly tell him that, no, the canals were just optical illusions created by his tired eyes and underpowered telescopes. Poor Lowell. His dream cities and noble Martians dissolved into dust, but his enthusiasm stuck. In fact, his writings inspired H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, which in turn seeded countless pop culture invasions. One man's squiggly telescope lines became Hollywood's favourite apocalypse scenario. The sky above you deepens into mauve, stars blinking on like cautious spectators. You picture Victorian gentlemen in top hats, pointing skyward with polished canes, spinning tales of Martian emperors commanding fleets of airships. It's almost comical, yet you can't help but admire their willingness to believe. In a way, those imagined canals were precursors to Atlas itself, structures that may or may not exist, but which demand to be noticed, studied, and mythologized. Your boots crunch through grit as you reflect on how human storytelling always fills in the gaps. Ancient Babylonians filled them with gods, Greeks filled them with warriors, Victorians filled them with aqueducts and cities, and here you are, staring at a metallic block with a bureaucratic stencil, filling it with speculation about shadow projects and hidden labs. The habit never changes. We're compulsive narrators, even when the stage is another planet. The wind picks up again, whispering across the plain like paper being shuffled. You imagine it as voices, Victorian voices this time, debating maps under gaslight. They didn't know about giant dust storms or dried riverbeds or volcanic calderas. They just had faint smudges and vivid imaginations. You wonder if future Martians will laugh at you the same way, shaking their heads at how you stood here speculating about Atlas, without any clue what it really was. For now, though, you let the dream linger. The canals never existed, but the idea of them carved its own permanent groove into our cultural imagination. They were the first step in painting Mars not as a dead world, but as a place with a past, maybe even a future. And you, standing here under a rising field of stars, are walking through that very groove, one dusty step at a time. The dust crunches beneath your boots, and you tilt your helmeted head back toward the salmon-coloured twilight, still haunted by the ghosts of Lowell's canals. But as the night deepens, another chapter in the Mars obsession flickers in your ears, not lines drawn on paper, but whispers carried across radio waves. The age of static and sparks, when humans first dared to think, maybe Mars is not just out there to be watched, but also trying to talk back. You can almost hear it now, the crackle of an old coil. Tesla himself hunched over his towering electrical contraptions in Colorado Springs in 1899. He's convinced he's picked up signals from beyond Earth. His notebooks describe rhythmic beeps, strange pulses of energy. He wonders aloud, could this be intelligent communication, perhaps even from Mars? Historians still argue whether Tesla actually detected natural cosmic phenomena, like pulsars which hadn't been discovered yet, or whether he simply misinterpreted atmospheric noise. But in the moment, Tesla's imagination leapt across millions of miles, bridging Colorado and the red planet with invisible threads of electricity. Here's the quirky tidbit. Newspapers of the time had a field day with Tesla's musings. Headlines shouted about Martians trying to say hello, and the public ate it up. It wasn't entirely far-fetched in an era obsessed with invention and possibility. After all, if a man could harness lightning, why couldn't he also eavesdrop on Martian conversations? You walk a little further, picturing those early radio dreamers fumbling with wires, sparks, and vacuum tubes, their headphones pressed tight, straining for alien voices. In the 1920s and 30s, as radio broadcasting took off, the air buzzed with the speculation. Amateur operators sometimes swore they heard faint, unexplained signals bouncing back. Some blamed Martians, others laughed. Still, the idea of a radio handshake across the void refused to die. The Atlas structure beside you feels suddenly alive with that energy, flat walls hiding possible antennae, or maybe just resonating with your imagination. You wonder if it's listening now, pulling in whispers from Earth, or maybe transmitting its own coded murmur back toward the pale blue dot. The silence of the Martian desert seems to amplify the thought, as though your own breath has become the static on Tesla's receiver. And of course, radio stories about Mars weren't always playful. Flash forward to 1938, and you're hearing Orson Welles' voice pour through speakers in American living rooms. Martians have landed in New Jersey. It was just a radio drama, a dramatization of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, but legend insists that thousands of listeners panicked, believing the invasion was real. Historians still argue how widespread that panic really was. Some say it was exaggerated by later retellings, but the cultural shockwave is undeniable. Mars wasn't just an astronomical curiosity anymore. It was a threat, a neighbour that could reach across the airwaves and unsettle your very sense of safety. You chuckle at the idea of Martians choosing New Jersey of all places as their landing site. Of course, it makes perfect sense. If you can survive the traffic around Newark, you can survive anything, but the deeper truth lingers. Mars had become part of humanity's collective nervous system, twitching through wires and filling the silence with imagined voices. You circle back toward Atlas, brushing your glove against its edge as though it might hum with hidden frequency. For a fleeting moment, you think you hear something. No, not a voice exactly, but a vibration. Maybe it's your own blood in your ears. Maybe it's just the wind pressing oddly against your suit. But maybe, just maybe, it's a continuation of Tesla's century-old experiment. Mars whispering back, not in canals, not in myths, but in pulses too faint to decode. The stars thicken overhead, sharp and brilliant against the thin Martian sky. And with them, your imagination thickens too, tangled with a century of static. Were those early dreamers wrong? Or were they the first to brush against a truth too slippery for us to hold? You don't know yet, but Atlas waits, silent and looming, as if it's the next receiver in that endless, crackling chain. The desert night grows colder, your breath fogging the inside of your helmet, but the presence of Atlas keeps your feet anchored. You've wandered through the myths, the canals, and the radio crackles of Martian lore, and now your thoughts drift into a more shadowed era, the Cold War, when nearly everything had two faces, one for the public, bright and polished, and one for the files stamped classified in red ink. You picture the 1950s and 60s, when the United States and the Soviet Union turned the skies into their chessboard. Rockets roared upward not only to prove technological muscle, but also to serve as thinly disguised ballistic missile tests. Mars, floating further away than the Moon but burning brighter in the imagination, became a kind of forbidden fruit. The Soviets launched a series of probes with dramatic names like Marsnik and Mars 1. Most failed, lost to the void or silenced by technical glitches. NASA, not to be outdone, was already sketching missions that would culminate in Mariner 4's first flyby in 1965. Historians still argue whether some of these missions carried more than scientific instruments. Were they testing communication systems that could double as military channels? Were satellites pointed at Mars also eavesdropping on each other's signals? In an era where even weather balloons could spark international incidents, it's not absurd to imagine space probes serving multiple masters. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the height of Cold War paranoia, rumors spread that the CIA had a psychic spy program. Remote viewers allegedly tasked with describing Soviet facilities without ever leaving a locked room. And yes, Mars came up in their sessions. Some of those declassified transcripts mention viewers seeing pyramidal structures on the Martian surface. Whether you take that as evidence of hidden ruins or simply overactive imaginations is the sort of detail that fits right in with the shadowy aura surrounding Atlas. You run your gloved fingers across the stenciled letters again, 3I/Atlas, and wonder if this structure could be the grandchild of that Cold War secrecy. Maybe not a military bunker, but perhaps a descendant of the same mindset. Build quietly, hide intentions, keep the truth compartmentalized until only a handful of people know what's really going on. It would be very Cold War after all to plant something here and then deny it so thoroughly that even future generations would doubt it existed. The Martian wind picks up, rattling the ground with a low-hatedly hum. You imagine it as the sound of old tape reels spinning, archivists whispering, spooks filing reports in underground rooms. Maybe Atlas is nothing more than an echo of that paranoia, a relic of human habit transplanted onto alien soil. Build a base, but paint it beige enough that no one looks twice. And yet the Cold War wasn't all fear and shadow. It also gave us breathtaking achievements. Sputnik's beeps circling Earth, Gagarin's smile as he orbited the planet, Apollo's footprints on the moon. Rivalry pushed both sides into the territories they might never have dared alone. So perhaps Atlas, whatever it is, isn't only a monument to secrecy. Perhaps it's also a monument to ambition, born out of the same fever that sent metal and men beyond Earth's cradle. You chuckle, because if some grim-faced intelligence officer had been told back in 1961 that their classified projects would one day fuel a sleepy bedtime story whispered on YouTube, they'd probably choke on their black coffee. But that's the strange poetry of history. What begins as serious and secretive can end up soft and dreamlike, drifting into imagination's hands. The night deepens, stars blazing with icy clarity. The structure beside you seems to hum with all those layers, myth, mistake, static, secrecy. You feel as though you're holding a stack of transparent slides, each era etched with its own vision of Mars. And now you're standing where they all overlap. Atlas is simply the newest slide on top of the stack. And in that layered glow you take one more step closer. The Cold War may have ended, but its shadows still stretch across the desert, stitched into the silence between dust and stars. Your boots crunch forward again, past the edge of Atlas's shadow, and for a moment you wonder if you've skipped a reel in history. 1 second you were thinking about Cold War secrecy. The next, the Martian surface around you is alive with the quiet footprints and tread marks of machines. You glance down and imagine tiny tracks pressed into the dust, stretching away like delicate scars. They don't belong to you. They belong to the robotic caravan humanity has sent here piece by piece, like scouts for some slow, patient migration. The first to greet you in memory is Viking 1, which touched down in 1976. Picture it, a spindly-legged lander, bristling with instruments, squatting on this same rusty soil. Viking carried not only cameras and chemistry kits, but also the weight of human hope. Could it find life? Its experiments gave frustratingly ambiguous results. Some tests hinted at biological activity, others denied it. Historians still argue whether Viking briefly sniffed something alive or whether it was fooled by odd soil chemistry. Either way, it was a start, a hesitant handshake with Mars's mysteries. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Viking landers also carried little plates engraved with the names of US senators and other dignitaries, a sort of cosmic guest book. Imagine if some future Martian archaeologist digs one up and decides those engraved names were the royal line of the Earth's rulers. They'd have a very skewed picture of our species. You walk further, the sand whispering against your suit, and imagine Pathfinder rolling toward you in 1997, its little rover Sojourner trundling along like a robotic pet. The first rover to actually move across the Martian surface, Sojourner was small enough to look like a toy, about the size of a microwave oven, but its tiny wheels carried enormous symbolic weight. Humanity wasn't just visiting anymore, we were beginning to explore, however clumsily. If Atlas represents permanence, Sojourner represents our first baby steps. The landscape flickers in your imagination again, and now it's curiosity lumbering into view in 2012. Much bigger, car-sized, equipped with drills and lasers, it feels like a proper adventurer. You picture it sending selfies back to Earth, dust-covered, wheels scarred but still plucky and determined. Curiosity is basically the extrovert of the rover family, always ready for another glamour shot. You chuckle, because if Curiosity had an Instagram account, it would probably have more followers than most human astronauts. And then, of course, Perseverance joins the caravan in 2021, landing with its helicopter sidekick Ingenuity. You imagine the whir of tiny rotors cutting through Mars' thin air, a sound that had never existed here before. Ingenuity was supposed to fly just 5 times, but it kept buzzing like a stubborn dragonfly, pushing the limits of what was thought possible. It became the first aircraft on another planet, a distinction that would have made the Wright brothers' jaws drop. The Atlas structure looms behind you silent, as if observing all this progress with quiet approval. Maybe it's a monument to these rovers, maybe even built to house the next generation. Or maybe it's unrelated entirely, and you're just weaving the story yourself, stitching together machines and myths. Either way, the thought comforts you. Atlas doesn't feel quite so lonely when you imagine it as part of a caravan, one node in a trail of explorers stretching from Viking to Perseverance. You pause, picturing the dust storms that have already buried some of those robots, like Opportunity, whose last message in 2018 was heartbreakingly simple. "My battery is low and it's getting dark." That phrase has become a kind of accidental poetry engraved in the human imagination. Machines, after all, don't write farewell letters. We wrote it for Opportunity, projecting our own longing into its silence. Mars didn't mourn it, but we did. Above you, the sky has deepened to velvet black, stars pricking sharp. You can almost feel the gaze of those silent machines across time, their cameras like unblinking eyes staring forever outward. Some still hum faintly, some are frozen relics, but all of them form a ghostly parade across this planet's surface. And in their company, you feel less alone. Atlas isn't just an anomaly anymore, it's a stage. And the actors, whether ancient gods, Cold War schemes, or robotic wanderers, have each played their scene here. You're just the latest arrival, walking between their footprints, waiting to see what role you've been given. You pause near the sloping base of Atlas, watching the horizon soften into starlit shadow. The air here, thin, brittle, almost absent, carries no smell, no warmth, no comfort. And yet human beings have a way of looking at such hostility and saying, yes, let's add palm trees. That's the dream of terraforming, the grand brochure fantasy that has clung to Mars for over a century. Take a frozen desert and turn it into something you could plant a lawn chair on. As you wander, you imagine opening one of those glossy, speculative brochures. Step 1, heat the planet by pumping greenhouse gases into the sky. Step 2, release water locked in the soil and polar ice caps, turning dust plains into rivers. Step 3, plant algae, let them breathe out oxygen, and before long you've got to a second Earth. Simple, right? You smirk because it sounds suspiciously like those easy 10-step plans to financial freedom spoiler. Not actually easy, not actually 10 steps. The idea isn't new. Science fiction writers in the mid-20th century latched onto it with gusto. Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles painted Mars as a place where human settlers reshaped the landscape in their own image. Engineers, meanwhile, sketched serious papers about giant orbital mirrors to reflect sunlight down, or even nuclear explosions to kickstart warming. Historians still argue whether those proposals were serious engineering or just elaborate thought experiments masquerading as blueprints. Either way, they kept the fantasy alive. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the 1970s, Carl Sagan himself suggested sprinkling Mars's polar caps with dark dust to absorb more sunlight, kind of like putting a black t-shirt over ice cubes. He didn't exactly pitch it as a weekend project, but the concept was simple enough to make headlines. Imagine future tourists visiting a museum exhibit. And this was the broom scientists proposed to scatter dirt across a whole planet. You shuffle across the sand, picturing each version of the terraforming dream. In some visions, Mars sprouts oceans that glint like sapphires, continents of emerald forest swaying in the thin breeze. In others, giant glass domes rise like snow globes, tiny Earth sealed inside fragile bubbles. And sometimes the dream veers into dystopia, a half-finished planet, oxygen only in patches, humans tethered to life support belts like divers on a broken reef. The ground under your boots feels dry, cracked, as though daring you to try. You crouch, scoop up a handful of dust, let it drift back down. Could this ever become soil? Could it hold roots, worms, raindrops? Or is it destined to remain nothing more than rust in endless permutations? You can almost hear future settlers debating the same thing around mess hall tables, their forks clinking against recycled metal plates. So should we nuke the ice caps after dessert or wait until Monday? The Atlas anomaly glows faintly behind you, its painted letters catching the faint starlight. Maybe it's part of this terraforming dream. Maybe 3i/Atlas is some experimental facility, testing chemical reactions in sealed chambers, running climate models no one back on Earth has the courage to fund openly. Or maybe it's the opposite, a reminder of how impossible the dream really is, a silent monument to experiments that didn't work. You feel a shiver despite the insulation. You chuckle softly, imagining the marketing slogan for a terraformed Mars, now with 30% more oxygen. It's absurd, yet also strangely persuasive. Humans have always dreamed of remaking landscapes. We drained swamps, dammed rivers, levelled mountains. Why would Mars be different? Except here, there are no safety nets, no backup ecosystems waiting to catch our mistakes. One wrong calculation, and the whole brochure turns into a smudged napkin sketch. Above, the stars are mercilessly bright, sharp against the black sky. They remind you that space doesn't care whether Mars grows trees or not. Only humans care. Only humans stare at red deserts and imagine blue oceans. Maybe that's our curse, or our gift. To look at emptiness and immediately start sketching gardens. The dust settles around your boots. Atlas waits silently, neither promising nor denying its role in that dream. And you, standing in the chill Martian night, can't decide if the brochure is inspiring or just another illusion, like canals under a Victorian telescope. You lean your shoulder against the cool surface of Atlas, the stenciled letters 3I/Atlas almost glowing in the starlight, and it hits you. The name itself feels like bait. 3 characters, a slash, a mythological jant. It's almost too cryptic. You can't help but wonder what rumours this thing has already stirred back on Earth. In fact, they've been swirling for years. Whispers on late-night radio shows, blurry diagrams passed around fringe forums, conspiratorial podcasts that confidently connect dots no one else can see. The theory goes that 3I is shorthand for a shadowy consortium. Sometimes it's Third Intelligence, sometimes Institute of Interplanetary Inquiry, sometimes just 3 eyes, like some cosmic surveillance project. Atlas in that telling isn't a one-off anomaly. It's a node, part of a network. Historians still argue whether these stories grew from genuine leaks, or whether they're simply modern versions of the Victorian canal craze. Humans can't resist filling in the blanks with drama, but the persistence of the rumours makes you pause. Why this name? Why here? Why painted so boldly as if daring someone, like you, to stumble across it? Here's a quirky tidbit. In the 1990s, a popular conspiracy claimed that NASA had secretly airbrushed out structures from Mars photos before releasing them. The face on Mars at Cydonia became poster child for this theory, with some believers swearing it was a giant monument, proof of an ancient civilization. Later high-resolution images showed it was just a funny-shaped mesa, but the suspicion lingered. "They're hiding something" became the refrain. Atlas, with its sharp edges and bureaucratic label, feels like it was designed to feed exactly that refrain. You chuckle softly, imagining the marketing pitch. New from the makers of Roswell, 3I/Atlas, part installation, part enigma, all conspiracy, but the laugh doesn't shake the goosebumps crawling your arms. Because even if 99 out of 100 rumours are nonsense, that last one still gnaws at you. What if there really is a hidden mission, tucked neatly between public budgets and press releases? The desert is silent, but your imagination is loud. You see a shadow launch at midnight, a rocket slipping from a classified pad with no fanfare, carrying experimental payloads never logged in open databases. You picture engineers with blank ID badges, signing non-disclosure agreements longer than novels, smiling just a little too tightly. Their hardware lands here, assembles itself, and then waits for what? Monitoring, mining, or maybe something stranger. Communication not with humans, but with whatever else might be listening in this solar system. The stars above shimmer coldly, indifferent to your spinning theories. But the wind kicks up again, brushing your suit with a whisper, almost as though the planet itself is feeding you lines. Maybe Atlas is the ultimate psychological experiment. Build a box, stamp it with a cryptic name, and watch how long it takes for human imagination to go feral. Judging by the flood of conspiracies, the experiment is a roaring success. Still, a part of you hopes the rumours are true. There's a thrill in believing that beyond the official missions, the rovers with Instagram-worthy selfies, the carefully televised landings, there's another layer, a hidden story running parallel. You glance at the letters again. 3I/Atlas. Too clean, too intentional, too cinematic to just be a forgotten prototype. You press your palm to the wall. The metal feels steady, indifferent. And yet you can't shake the sense that someone, somewhere, is watching. Not gods, not Martians, but human eyes hidden behind mirrored glass, waiting to see how you react to their breadcrumb. Maybe that's the real Atlas burden. Carrying the weight of our rumours, our paranoia, our desperate need to believe there's more than dust in the desert. The rumours buzz in your head as you circle the perimeter of Atlas, but the planet interrupts you. A low moan begins to swell across the horizon, not mechanical, not human, but natural, ancient. The wind rises into a long, unbroken howl, and before you realise it, the stars vanish. The world dissolves into ochre haze. A dust storm has come, fast and merciless, like a curtain drawn by an impatient stagehand. Your visor fogs with grit as sand scours your suit. Mars storms are no ordinary weather, they're titanic. Some cover regions the size of continents, others wrap the entire planet in a reddish shroud that can last for months. Imagine an entire world losing its face swallowed in copper mist. Historians still argue whether such storms were responsible for scouring away much of Mars' atmosphere long ago, or whether they're merely symptoms of a planet already gasping for air. Either way, they feel like the planet's way of saying, "Privacy, please." You crouch instinctively, pressing close to Atlas's flank. The surface vibrates faintly with the storm's power, humming like a drum skin stretched across eternity. Your heart thuds, but another thought tickles you. Opportunity, the rover that went silent in 2018, met its end in just such a storm. That famous farewell line, "My battery is low and it's getting dark," wasn't actually written by the rover, of course. It was human poetry layered onto machine telemetry. A quirky tidbit then. The real final message was far less lyrical, just data about dwindling power and fading communication. But humans couldn't resist turning it into a haiku of heartbreak. The storm thickens. You can't see your boots, can barely see your outstretched hand. Dust swirls like smoke, filling your lungs in imagination, though your suit keeps you safe. You try to picture ancient eyes seeing this from Earth. To them, Mars' sudden disappearance in telescopes, its surface swallowed by featureless haze, must have looked ominous. Entire civilizations could be erased behind that veil. Maybe they imagined gods hiding their wars in private, or civilizations shuttering their windows as cosmic dust rolled through their streets. A sudden lull opens just for a moment, like the storm taking a deep breath. Through the haze, Atlas glows faintly, steady and unbothered. Its letters, half blurred by dust, seem almost to change, 3i/Atlas shimmering like it wants to say something else. You blink, cough, shake your head, and the illusion's gone. Just paint and grit again. But your nerves tingle. Maybe the storm is the real test. Could Atlas be designed to withstand centuries of this? Or even to harvest it, siphoning static and motion into energy? You chuckle weakly at your own imagination. The idea of a building running on Martian sandstorms sounds like a science fair project taken way too seriously. But then again, people once thought flying across oceans was ridiculous, and now we complain if our Wi-Fi drops mid-flight. The wind roars again, louder, pulling at you like invisible hands. You hunker down, letting your weight sink into the soil. The storm rages, but slowly, gradually, your panic ebbs. The rhythm of it is hypnotic, almost like white noise, the kind people back home play on their phones to fall asleep. You wonder if Martian settlers will someday record these storms for ASMR channels. 8 hours of soothing alien dust storm for deep sleep. The thought makes you grin behind your visor. Minutes stretch into something timeless. The storm doesn't end, it just becomes background. Your senses adjust. You no longer fight it, you let it fold over you like a blanket. And through the veil, Atlas stands steady, unshaken, bearing the planet's fury with the patience of stone. The storm thins like a retreating tide, leaving the air dusty but transparent enough to breathe with your eyes again. You straighten slowly, brushing red grit off your suit. The silence after the roar feels unnatural, almost deafening, and in that pause you notice something different. The ground beneath your boots isn't just sand, it's solid, dark, pitted basalt. You crouch, running your glove over the surface. The rock feels smoother than the surrounding soil, its rippled edges a frozen memory of fire. Mars is littered with basalt, the cooled remains of volcanic outpourings that once shaped its plains. Billions of years ago, this planet wasn't a dry desert. It was alive with eruptions, lava rivers, and even floods of water. You stare at the layers stacked in the cliff face nearby, each stripe a diary entry in the planet's long history. Some darker, some lighter, some streaked with minerals that hint at ancient chemistry experiments played out on a world-sized scale. Historians still argue whether Mars was ever warm and wet enough to host oceans, or whether its rivers were more like brief violent floods, water boiling off in the thin atmosphere as soon as it broke free. But the evidence sits right in front of you. Channels carved into the land, sediment fans frozen mid-spill, and minerals that only form in liquid water. This desert was once noisy with water's rush. Here's a quirky tidbit. Back in 2015, NASA announced evidence of recurring slope lineae, dark streaks that seem to appear and fade with the seasons, as though salty water was trickling downhill. The headlines exploded, "Liquid water found on Mars," but later studies suggested it might just be dry grains of sand sliding down. The debate became a tug-of-war between yes, streams, and nope, avalanches. Even in modern science, Mars loves to keep its secrets murky. You stand and let your eyes trace the etched patterns in the basalt around Atlas's base. Some of the grooves look natural, like the cooling cracks of lava, but others look almost deliberate, parallel, tidy as though someone carved them with a steady hand. Your rational brain whispers erosion, tectonics, randomness, blah, blah. Your imagination whispers writing. And for a breathless second, you can almost believe you're staring at inscriptions left by something not human. You laugh nervously because it's exactly the kind of thing conspiracy theorists would screenshot and circle with red ink. Proof of Martian script, suppressed by NASA. But still, you can't shake the feeling. Mars is a planet of pareidolia. Faces in mesas, cities in rock piles, symbols in cracks. Humans can't resist seeing meaning in the chaos. Maybe that's our way of talking back to the silence. You walk along the cliff, fingers trailing over rough ridges. The basalt tells stories in texture. Jagged where lava cooled quickly, smooth where it flowed in sheets, porous where bubbles of gas froze mid-escape. Each detail feels alive, a frozen echo of violence and change. You think of Earth's own basalt fields, like the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, with its eerie hexagonal columns. People once thought those stones were the work of giants. Maybe Mars too once earned its myths from basalt. Above, the stars have returned, sharp and steady. The storm is already a memory. But in the ground at your feet, time moves differently. Each layer of rock whispers of eras before humans, before life on Earth even dared crawl out of the sea. Mars cliffs are older than your imagination. Atlas looms quietly behind you, its surface faintly dusted by the storm, its letters a little blurred. You glance back, half expecting new marks to have appeared beside the name, carved by the wind itself. Nothing obvious, but you can't help squinting at the patterns in the rock, wondering if Atlas is less an installation and more a translation. A device built here to help humans read the geology, the scripts already etched by the planet itself. Either way, you can feel it. The ground is speaking, and for once, you're listening. The basalt beneath your boots feels heavy with history, but your gaze drifts upward toward the sky. Somewhere out there, invisible to your naked eye, telescopes and orbiters keep sniffing this thin atmosphere, searching for whispers of something elusive. Methane. The faintest whiff of life, or at least of chemistry that refuses to behave politely. Methane on Mars has become one of the great scientific soap operas of the past 2 decades. In 2003, telescopic observations suggested there might be trace amounts of it in the Martian air. Later, NASA's Curiosity rover confirmed spikes of methane near its landing site. But here's the kicker, the detections aren't consistent. Some days, the methane seems to vanish entirely, only to reappear in teasing bursts. Historians still argue whether these signals are genuine or the result of instrument quirks, dust interference, or wishful data processing. You tilt your helmet back, staring at the stars, imagining that invisible gas flickering in and out like cosmic Morse code. If methane is real here, it could come from 2 very different sources, either geological reactions, like rocks releasing trapped gases, or biological activity, microbes burping under the soil. One is exciting, the other is revolutionary, and right now, no one knows which it is. Here's a quirky tidbit. Methane is so fragile in Mars' atmosphere that it should break down quickly under sunlight. So if it's showing up, it must be getting replenished. That's why every little spike makes headlines, because it suggests something down there, or up here, depending on perspective, is still active. Imagine living microbes exhaling just enough to make scientists on Earth lose sleep. You breathe deeply, pretending for a moment that the thin Martian air could reach your lungs. What if every breath you took here carried molecules exhaled by invisible neighbours, clinging stubbornly to existence under basalt layers? The thought is eerie but oddly comforting. After all, solitude feels less harsh when you imagine company, even microbial company. Atlas looms at your side, silent but suddenly suspicious. Could this installation be connected to the methane mystery? Maybe 3i/Atlas is monitoring it, sniffing the air like a cosmic chemist, gathering data too volatile to share with the public. Maybe the inconsistency isn't an accident at all, but a controlled release, Atlas opening a valve, letting out tiny puffs of gas like test signals. You chuckle at the image, Atlas as a giant planetary whoopee cushion, driving Earth scientists into decades of debate. The night deepens, stars crisp against the thin sky. You imagine future settlers holding community meetings. Methane spiked again today. Was it geology, biology, or just the kids opening the wrong valve at Atlas stairs? The room would buzz with nervous laughter, but underneath it, a hum of hope. Because methane isn't just chemistry, it's possibility. It's the dangling carrot of alien life, dangling so close and yet maddeningly out of reach. You crouch, touch the ground, and whisper a question no one can hear. Are you alive under there? The silence that follows is the same silence Tesla strained against, the same silence Lowell filled with canals, the same silence every rover has rolled across. But silence doesn't mean emptiness, it just means waiting. The wind sighs, faint and tired after the storm. Atlas stands steady, as inscrutable as ever. Maybe it knows the answer, maybe it is the answer, but for now, the mystery lingers like methane itself. Appearing, vanishing, teasing, refusing to settle. You rest your hand against the basalt one last time, then turn back toward the Atlas structure. The storm is gone, the methane whispers are fading into memory, and yet the anomaly itself looms larger now, less like an object and more like a presence. The letters 3i/Atlas still shine faintly in the starlight, and your pulse quickens as you trace their outline. This time you don't just linger at the surface, you push forward. The front face of Atlas reveals itself as you circle it, an angled wall, half buried by sand with seams that look almost like doors. You reach out, brushing grit away, and feel a subtle difference beneath your glove. Smooth panels fitted together, engineered rather than eroded. One seam vibrates faintly, as though machinery hums beneath. Your breath fogs the visor. Maybe it's the storm echoing in your imagination, or maybe the building is alive in its own quiet way. Historians still argue whether facilities like this could exist at all. Officially, no nation has admitted to building anything permanent on Mars, yet whispers about classified experiments, biological labs, communication arrays, even prototype habitats, refuse to die. You think of Cold War bunkers back on Earth, buried in mountains and deserts, secrets hidden in plain sight. Atlas feels like a sibling of those places, not designed for glory but for endurance. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the 1980s, NASA engineers actually sketched plans for inflatable Martian habitats, giant fabric domes that could be shipped folded and then expanded with air. They looked more like bouncy castles than serious laboratories. Some even proposed burying them under sand for protection, which makes you grin. Imagine arriving on Mars and finding humanity's first outpost looking like a half-deflated carnival attraction. You press harder against the seam, and this time a soft vibration answers. Then, so subtly you almost miss it, a sliver of light appears. Not bright, not harsh, but a muted glow, like fireflies caught behind frosted glass. Your breath catches. The Atlas vault is opening. The panel shifts with a slow hiss, and a narrow corridor yawns before you. Inside, the air looks thicker, swirling faintly as though conditioned. The walls are smooth, ribbed with embedded lights that hum just above the edge of hearing. You step in, boots clanging against a surface that isn't stone or dust, but some alloy, unyielding and cold. The corridor leads downward. You follow, each step echoing like you're trespassing in a museum after hours. The walls are bare except for stenciled numbers and occasional arrows, all in the same clinical font as the 3i/Atlas label outside. Everything screams bureaucracy rather than artistry, and yet the effect is strangely unsettling. The mundane is more alien than the alien would have been. At the base of the corridor, the space widens into a chamber. Tables, consoles, racks of equipment, everything frozen mid-task, as if whoever worked here simply walked away. A screen flickers on one wall, displaying graphs that twitch with unreadable data. Tubes coil across the floor, humming faintly. And at the centre, a tall cylindrical tank pulses with dim light. Inside, not liquid exactly, but a shifting haze, shimmering like dust caught in a sunbeam. You approach slowly, heart in your throat. The tank gives off no heat, no sound, but its presence is magnetic. Is this the core of Atlas? A lab experiment? A power source? Or something more unnerving, something waiting? The lights overhead flicker once, twice, your visor fogs again, this time from your own shallow breathing. You chuckle nervously because if this were a movie, this would be the part where the tank cracks open and a tentacle slaps the camera. Instead, nothing happens. The tank just hums softly, indifferent to your fear. Still, the implication gnaws at you. Maybe Atlas isn't an outpost for humans. Maybe it's an archive, quietly cataloguing, testing, preserving something Mars itself produced. Or maybe it's studying you, logging your every step since you arrived. You place your palm against the glass. The haze inside swirls, almost as if responding. You pull back quickly, pulse pounding. The chamber feels heavier now, like the walls are listening. Atlas is no longer just a building. It's awake. You back away from the humming tank, boots ringing against the alloy floor, and find yourself laughing under your breath. Not the sharp laugh of fear, but the nervous chuckle of someone who just realized they might have stumbled into a myth being written in real time. Because standing here in the vault of Atlas, your thoughts circle back to a truth humans can't escape. We've always spun folklore out of places like this, and Mars, more than any other world, is begging to become a myth factory. You imagine the first human settlers, centuries from now, huddled around a heater in a dome somewhere near Olympus Mons. Maybe they've just finished a long shift mining regolith, or adjusting solar arrays. Their voices drift in the recycled air as someone begins a story. They say the mountains move at night. They say Atlas keeps watch. A ripple of nervous laughter, then a hush as the storyteller leans closer. Folklore doesn't wait for centuries to grow. It sprouts immediately, wherever humans need to explain the strange or pass the time. Historians still argue whether the first Martian myths will be imported wholesale from Earth or invented fresh on the red soil. Will settlers recycle old gods, Mars the warrior, Ares the chaotic, Nergal the fiery? Or will they create new spirits for dust storms, methane ghosts, and the silence between stars? The debate is academic now, but you can already feel the answers echoing through these halls. Here's a quirky tidbit. When Apollo astronauts landed on the moon, some of them reported seeing flashes of light when they closed their eyes, caused by cosmic rays hitting their retinas. Back home, it became an inside joke. Moon spirits poking you in your sleep. Imagine how much richer the stories will be here, with storms swallowing horizons and strange installations like Atlas humming in the dust. You wander deeper into the chamber, past consoles blank except for the faint reflection of your visor. Every detail feels like an invitation for myth. The glowing tank? Future settlers might call it the Lantern of Atlas, said to hold a fragment of the planet's soul. The humming pipes, they could become the singing veins, channels where the breath of Mars is trapped. Even the sterile arrows on the wall might morph into symbols of protection, graffiti scratched by the first engineers to claim this space as home. You chuckle again, imagining kids born on Mars trading ghost stories in low gravity. Don't walk the dunes at night, one might whisper, or the dust eater will follow your tracks. Another might insist that storms aren't storms at all, but the footsteps of invisible giants. It's inevitable. Wherever humans go, myths follow like shadows. The air in the chamber tastes metallic through your filters, and you wonder, is Atlas itself feeding the folklore? Was it built not only as a lab, but also as a seed, designed to grow stories that keep settlers curious, cautious, maybe even obedient? You shake your head, amused at your own paranoia. But then again, folklore has always been a tool, sometimes of survival, sometimes of control. You close your eyes and picture the Martian pantheon of the future. Olympus Mons, the tallest volcano in the solar system, becomes the throne of fire. Valles Marineris, a canyon so vast it makes the Grand Canyon look like a crack in the sidewalk, becomes the Serpent's Scar. And Atlas becomes the watcher, the silent witness to every myth, the building that was here before the storytellers even arrived. When you open your eyes, the chamber feels different, less like a sterile lab, more like a cathedral. The tank's glow casts long shadows, and for a heartbeat you swear you see figures moving in the dark, not hostile, just present. Future echoes of humans who haven't been born yet, already spinning their folklore around you. You press your hand against the nearest console, grounding yourself. The myths aren't written yet, but you can feel them breathing down your neck. And maybe, just maybe, you're helping to write the first draft. You step away from the glowing tank, its haze still shimmering faintly behind you, and wander deeper into the chamber. The air hums softly, the alloy floor amplifying each step. And then, strangely, your thoughts drift upward, not to the stars, but to the lopsided shadows of Mars' tiny moons. Phobos and Deimos, two potato-shaped companions tumbling awkwardly around this planet like leftovers from a cosmic snack tray. You've read about them, but standing here in Atlas, their presence feels sharper, almost insistent. Phobos, the closer one, whips around Mars so quickly that it rises and sets twice each Martian day. Deimos, slower and more distant, hangs like a timid observer. Fear and terror, their names mean in Greek, cheerful companions for the red planet. Historians still argue where they came from. Are they captured asteroids, yanked in by Mars' gravity? Or are they fragments of the planet itself, blasted loose by some colossal impact? Both theories have holes, leaving their origin a riddle. And riddles, as you've learned tonight, are fertile ground for myth. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the late 19th century, astronomer Asaph Hall discovered both moons within a week. Some conspiracy-minded writers later joked that Hall didn't discover them, he simply noticed what was already written. After all, Jonathan Swift had described 2 Martian moons in Gulliver's Travels more than a century earlier, including eerily accurate details about their orbits. Coincidence? Prophecy? Or just a writer getting lucky with math? You grin at the thought of Swift rolling in his grave, realizing his satire accidentally spawned a conspiracy theory. You imagine settlers staring up at Phobos, its jagged surface slipping across the sky. They'd see it getting closer each year, because yes, Phobos is spiraling inward. In 50 million years, give or take, it will either smash into Mars or break apart into a ring of debris. That's the stuff of legend. A doomed moon, falling inch by inch, an omen written in orbital mechanics. The Atlas chamber suddenly feels smaller, the hum louder, as though the installation itself is part of that larger riddle. What if 3i/Atlas isn't about Mars at all, but about the moons? Could this place be watching Phobos and Deimos, tracking their strange dance? Some fringe theorists even whisper that Phobos isn't natural at all, that its hollow-sounding radar echoes hint at an artificial shell, a cosmic station disguised as a rock. You chuckle nervously because just standing inside Atlas makes the idea seem less laughable. You run your glove over the smooth console at your side. Maybe Atlas is a relay, a node between Mars and its moons. Maybe signals bounce invisibly across that triangle, Phobos, Deimos, Atlas, forming a secret constellation in the silence. Or maybe the moons themselves are the real archives, their battered surfaces storing messages we haven't learned to read yet. The air tastes metallic again through your filters. You tilt your head and imagine Phobos looming above, blotting out stars with its lumpy bulk, whispering old stories down to Atlas. Perhaps settlers will someday call it the Watcher's Eye, always circling, never blinking. Deimos, smaller and shyer, might become the listener, drifting in silence at the edges of vision. Together, they'll weave themselves into Martian folklore just as surely as they weave themselves into your thoughts now. A soft vibration runs through the floor, pulling you back to the present. The tank hums, the consoles flicker, and Atlas feels more awake than before. Maybe the installation isn't just monitoring the planet. Maybe it's linked to the moons, bound in some slow, secret dialogue overhead. Fear, terror, Atlas. The names alone sound like characters waiting for their myth to be written. You smile, uneasy but fascinated. Mars has never been alone. It has always had its companions, its silent satellites, tumbling faithfully around it. And maybe, just maybe, so does Atlas. You wander away from the humming core of Atlas and find a side corridor with a window, an honest-to-goodness pane looking out into another chamber. Beyond the glass, a dome blooms under the cavern ceiling, translucent like a soap bubble that decided to grow a backbone. The structure is ribbed with latticework and flecked with dust, and inside it breathes a small world. Pale green leaves, trellis lines, a narrow path curling through planter beds like a polite creek. The air on your side of the window tastes metallic. The air under the dome looks thick with life, almost chewable. Architects of the thin sky, you think. People who looked at Mars's anorexic atmosphere and said, "Fine, we'll build our own." You palm the access panel, its size open to a small airlock, a whisper of pressure equalization, then another door, and you step into the dome. The first sensation is humidity. Mars, the planet that mummifies everything, somehow smells like cut grass and damp cloth in here. It's the olfactory equivalent of a hug. LEDs track the curve of the ribbing, tuned to mimic a slow sunrise. You can hear the soft tick of pumps, the gentle hiss of a CO2 scrubber exhaling like a sleepy cat. Your visor HUD blinks happy numbers. Oxygen, temperature, pressure, Goldilocks settings engineered by someone who cared more about beans and basil than heroics. You stroll the path, boots muted by a rubber matting. Along the edge, planters sit like drawers from a giant apothecary cabinet. Leafy greens, squat tomatoes the colour of sunset, dwarf wheat with golden whiskers. A little placard the size of a bookmark catches your eye. Sabatier loop, CO 2 plus H 2 arrow CH 4 plus H2O. The water gets split, the oxygen banked for breathing, the methane saved for fuel. Even in a dream, the chemistry is comfortingly neat. You smile. Somewhere in the building, a reactor hums the quiet math of survival. Historians still argue whether first-generation Martian habitats should live above ground in domes like this or hide in lava tubes to dodge radiation. The trade-offs read like a dating profile. Surface domes, great views, higher risk. Subsurface caves, safe and stable but moody lighting. Whichever path wins, engineers will keep carving life out of thin air and thinner budgets. For now, this bubble feels like an architectural argument you can breathe. You pause by a small tree no taller than your chest, bearing tiny lemons like ornaments. Your mind flickers to a mainstream milestone. In 2021, astronauts on the ISS harvested the first chili peppers grown in orbit and made space tacos. The photos looked like a school science fair that accidentally went to space, and everyone seemed genuinely giddy. If orbit can have tacos, Mars can have lemons. It's practically a law. You picture early settlers holding a first pizza night on Mars, arguing about pineapple as if the nearest neighbour weren't millions of miles away. Some debates are truly universal. A soft whir above your head draws your attention. Microsprayers mist the leaves, each droplet catching LED light and turning the air into glitter. Under the benches run fat tubes of water and thinner veins of nutrient solution. Whoever designed this place obsessed over redundancy. 2 pumps in parallel, twin filters you could swap one-handed, sensor nodes with old-fashioned analog dials taped beside digital readouts. Because when the software sulks, a needle still tells you the truth. You stop at a wall panel showing a life support flow. Crew exhales CO2, plants inhale it, plants exhale O2, crew inhales it, an elegant waltz. But there's a twist. A box labelled Moxie-style O2 boost, with an arrow from Martian air to oxygen tank. You nod, remembering the instrument that actually did this trick on the Perseverance rover, sipping the planet's carbon dioxide and spitting out little shots of oxygen. It wasn't much by Earth standards, but proof is a seed. Tonight, you're walking inside the adult plant. Open scholarly debate phrases itself in your head. Scientists still argue whether partial gravity, Mars' easy-breezy 0.38 g, is enough to keep human bodies healthy long-term. Will bones sulk and thin? Will hearts get lazy? Will eyes reshape themselves in weird ways? Some architects draw whole rotating ring habitats to spin gravity into existence, while others insist clever exercise and diet will do. You picture a treadmill in the corner glaring at you like a PE teacher. Fine, you'll run. Later. Probably. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early closed ecology experiments on Earth, Biosphere 2 for one, ended up with odd outcomes, including lowered oxygen that had crew members panting like they'd climbed a mountain indoors. Microbes in the soil were partying on oxygen like it was a Black Friday sale. The lesson stuck. Ecosystems have egos, and they'll rewrite your plans for fun. Looking around this dome, you see signs that Atlas's gardeners learned it the hard way. Soil beds layered with inert substrates, microbial monitors blinking green, and a handwritten label on a compost barrel reading, "Worm VIP Lounge." You grin. If the worms are happy, the humans probably are too. You drift toward the far side of the dome where the world goes industrial again. Fat barrel-sized tanks buttressed by brackets, a bank of thin-film batteries, and a heat exchanger the size of a sofa humming like a friendly refrigerator. A placard reads, "Water is your retirement plan, don't spend it all on showers. Mars humour dry as the regolith." You remember our earlier brochure fantasies, orbital mirrors, nuked ice caps, and this room feels like the opposite, the accountant's version of heroism, where every litre is tracked, every calorie gets a job. Underfoot, the floor changes from rubber to something like compacted brick. You kneel, brush a glove over the surface and find its sintered regolith. Mars dirt baked into tiles, each stamped with a date and a tiny atlas glyph. The callback makes you smirk. Remember the Victorian canal maps? Neat lines where none existed. Here the lines are real, printed into existence with heat and stubbornness. If canals were wishful thinking, these tiles are the opposite. Proof that you can tell a planet stay and have it listen at least long enough to hold your weight. Past the tanks, a small antechamber displays habitat mock-ups like an architect's portfolio. 1. An inflatable cylinder buried beneath a metre of dirt, storm-rated and introvert-approved. 2. A greenhouse rib that doubles as a roll-up sled in emergencies. 3. A plug-and-play radiation storm shelter, just add water walls. You press a finger to the Plex casing, thinking of the people who will actually live inside these sketches, their shoes squeaking, their jokes getting recycled like air. You hope the designers left room for a window. Even subterranean souls need a square of fake sky and a fan that hums like an old friend. A tiny buzzer chirps, someone's timer, and a robotic arm the size of a heron neck glides along a rail, snipping a yellowed leaf and dropping it into a compost chute. It's precise but polite, the way good tools are. You realise a strange calm has slipped over you, the dome's rhythm syncing with your own. If Section 11's storm was a drum solo, this is the slow metronome beneath a lullaby. The planet howls, the habitat keeps time. You pass a rack of suits customised with greenhouse patches, little embroidered sprouts and a goofy slogan, "Grow big or go home. Oops, no home." You snort. 3 light jokes per 1,000 words, remember? You're on schedule. Besides, gallows humour is a nutrient here. When the sky is thin, laughter has to be thick. At the exit, an etched note catches your eye, tucked beside the door handle. Remember to smell the basil. It's both safety advice and philosophy. The world outside is magnificent and lethal. In here, a leaf smells like survival. You tilt your helmet toward a basil cluster and imagine breathing it in, peppery and bright, letting it elbow aside the scent of metal and dust. You thumb the latch and glance back once more. The dome's LEDs dim a notch to mimic dusk. Leaves settle, pumps purr. If Atlas is a riddle, this room is one answer written in chlorophyll and plumbing. It doesn't conquer Mars, doesn't terraform it into a blue and green postcard. It just insists, gently, stubbornly, that life will have a corner, a carve-out, a bubble with its own weather, and a to-do list of small, heroic chores. You step out, the door sighs shut, and the bubble becomes a memory behind glass. Ahead, the corridor slopes toward new diagrams, new mysteries. You still carry the storm's grit in your seams, the basalt's chill in your boots, and now the greenhouse's humidity in your heartbeat. The thin sky waits, so do its architects, and so do you. The corridor slopes downward again, lights humming softly in the alloy walls, and you feel your body beginning to lose its sense of rhythm. How long have you been here? Minutes? Hours? The Martian day, the soul is longer than Earth's by just 39 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but it plays tricks on human biology. Your circadian rhythm starts to drift, nudge slowly out of sync with what your cells expect. You stop for a moment and close your eyes. The air is steady, filtered, humming with Atlas's breath. You imagine trying to live here permanently. You're in a clock pulled slightly wider each day. Would you adapt gracefully, stretching into the Martian tempo? Or would your body rebel, always half jet-lagged, never quite rested? Scientists still argue whether humans can entrain to a 24.6-hour day without medical intervention, or whether settlers will need timed lights and hormone therapy to stay sane. A planet's day length might become as important to health as air and water. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the early 2000s, NASA mission teams on Earth actually lived on Mars time while operating rovers. They shifted their schedules by 40 minutes each day. At first, it was fun, like perpetual jet setting, but soon it became chaos. Families couldn't keep up, workers felt like vampires, and offices had to label clocks Earth time and Mars time just to avoid missed meetings. The experiment proved the challenge wasn't just technical, it was profoundly human. You continue down the passage and it opens into another chamber, this one stranger than the rest. Rows of chairs face a wall where shifting light patterns ripple like slow auroras. No consoles, no tanks, just light and sound, faint pulses and tones echoing like heartbeat monitors. You sit gingerly in one of the chairs. The material conforms to your body, supporting you so perfectly it feels uncanny. Then the lights shift in time with your own pulse and you realise this room is designed to entrain you to sync your body's rhythm with Mars's rhythm. Atlas, you realise, is playing with time. Not bending space-time in the Einstein sense, no warp drives here, but bending perception. It's tricking human biology into accepting the 24.6-hour day, turning settlers into instruments tuned to the planet's beat. The lights pulse slower than you expect, and for a moment you feel like you're falling behind, like your thoughts are dragging. Then slowly you catch up. Your breaths deepen. The weight on your chest loosens. You chuckle softly, because it reminds you of old sleep apps back on Earth. Those glowing orbs you're supposed to breathe along with. Inhale, exhale, except this version has a whole planet behind it insisting match me. The wall patterns shift, becoming geometric for a moment. Hexagons, spirals, loops. They remind you of ancient timekeepers. Sundials, water clocks, mechanical astrolabes. Humans have always tried to trap time in symbols. Atlas seems to be doing the same thing, but for a more intimate purpose. Keeping your body from unravelling in the wrong-sized day. Historians still argue whether time itself can be felt differently under altered gravity or atmosphere. Einstein proved that clocks tick at different rates depending on speed and gravity wells, but perception is another thing entirely. Does a Martian minute feel the same as an Earth minute? Or does the subtle drag of lighter gravity stretch it out, like notes held just a touch too long? You sit, breathing in rhythm with the pulses, and the question feels less like science and more like philosophy. Here's the strangest thought of all. Maybe Atlas isn't just syncing humans to Mars. Maybe it's syncing Mars to humans, aligning perception across species and centuries, turning the planet's silence into something we can metabolize. The room feels less like a laboratory and more like a chapel of time, where seconds bend softly until you can sleep inside them. You rise slowly, reluctant to break the spell, and step back into the corridor. The hum of Atlas follows you like an echo of your own pulse. The planet's rhythm and your rhythm, they're tangled now, impossible to tell apart. The corridor bends again, and this time there's no mistaking it. Atlas has been leading you somewhere. You've wandered through storms and basalt, myths and greenhouses, whispers of methane and tricks of time, but here the path feels personal, as though the installation has peeled away its layers and is finally showing you its core intent. The chamber you step into is stark. No glowing tanks, no domes of basil, no humming time lights, just a single chair in the centre, lit from above by a cone of white light. Everything else falls into the shadow. The setup is too theatrical to be accidental. You laugh softly, because if Atlas were a stage magician, this would be its big reveal. You circle the chair cautiously. It looks ordinary enough. Ergonomic curves, padding that invites you to sink in. But the longer you stare, the more it feels like a mirror. Not in reflection, but in intention. The whole place has been studying Mars, you think. But what if that wasn't the point? What if Atlas has been studying you all along? Historians still argue whether the purpose of exploration is about the places visited or the people doing the visiting. Some frame it as science, collect samples, gather data, map terrain. Others insist the true discoveries are inward, how exploration reshapes human culture, imagination, identity. Standing here in this too perfectly staged chamber, you feel the argument collapse into reality. Atlas doesn't need Martian soil or sky, it needs a human sitting in that chair. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the 1960s, NASA ran isolation experiments with volunteers locked into cramped habitats for weeks. Some of the test subjects coped fine, others unravelled spectacularly, inventing imaginary companions or obsessively rearranging objects. The conclusion was simple but sobering. Space isn't just about rockets and fuel, it's about psychology. Atlas, you realise, might be the grandest psychology experiment of them all. You touch the chair. It's warm, like it's been waiting. A faint hum begins under your fingertips, syncing with your pulse the way the time chamber did earlier. You pull back quickly, heart skipping, but the hum doesn't stop. It lingers in your bones. The installation isn't just passively observing, it's responding. Theories flood your mind. Maybe 3I stands for third iteration, and you're part of the third generation of test subjects. Maybe it's 3 interfaces, designed to link human, machine, and environment. Or maybe it's simpler. 3 I's. Observer. Observed. And you, the eye in the middle, tying the two together. You chuckle nervously. If you're being studied, what data are they collecting? Your oxygen intake? Your stress hormones? The way your thoughts spiral into jokes when the silence gets too heavy? Somewhere, maybe light years away, someone could be reading your story like lab notes. Subject placed in anomaly. Subject speculated about myths. Subject chuckled at vending machine joke. Subject compliant. The spotlight dims slightly, inviting you closer. You hesitate, then step into the cone of light. The air feels thicker here, heavy with expectation. You lower yourself into the chair. It sighs beneath your weight, moulding perfectly to your frame. Lights flicker along the edges of the chamber, and a faint projection appears on the wall. Lines of text, shifting too quickly to read. Graphs spike, curves ripple. You know, with a clarity that silences all jokes, that you are now the experiment. Maybe that's always been Atlas's role. Not a vault, not a lab, not a greenhouse. A mirror, a stage, a place to capture the human reaction to Mars. Because the truth is, Mars doesn't need us. It will keep spinning, storming, freezing regardless. But we need it. Its myths, its mysteries, its red deserts, to tell us who we are. You exhale slowly, letting the chair hold you. If Atlas is recording, let it record. Let it know that you felt awe at basalt cliffs, fear in dust storms, tenderness at a dome of basalt, and curiosity at a tank of shimmering haze. Let it know that even when the silence pressed hard, you filled it with stories. Because maybe that's the real experiment. Not whether humans can survive Mars, but whether humans can survive themselves while standing here. The chair hums under you, cradling your body as though it's memorizing every contour. The white spotlight softens, fades, and for the first time since you stumbled upon Atlas, the installation feels gentle. Not clinical, not secretive, not menacing, just present. The chamber's edges dissolve into shadow, and when you tilt your head back, the ceiling above has vanished, replaced by a dome of alien stars. Mars' night sky is unlike Earth's, stark, crystalline, a desert of light scattered across velvet. The air is too thin for twinkle, so the stars hang steady, sharp as diamonds. Phobos drifts past like a bruised pebble. Deimos lingers faintly at the edge of vision. You realise with a jolt that you've lost track of time entirely. The experiment, the storm, the tank, the greenhouse, all of it feels folded into this one moment. Historians still argue whether exploration ends in discovery or in reflection. Tonight, you lean toward the latter, because what Atlas has revealed isn't an answer but a mirror, showing you your own restless hunger for meaning. The building never spoke. You filled its silence with gods, canals, radios, conspiracies, storms, geology, methane, myths, moons, greenhouses, clocks. Every step you've painted Mars with human colours, and now, in the hush of night, the planet peels them away, leaving only stars. Here's a quirky tidbit. Astronauts on the International Space Station sometimes describe orbital sunrises as the most moving part of their day, the Earth curving blue under their feet while the sun slices gold across its edge. Up here on Mars, you imagine settlers might say the opposite. The nights are what break you open. Nights so dark and clean they make you feel both impossibly small and impossibly precious. The wind outside picks up again, but this time it doesn't roar. It sighs across the desert like a lullaby. Dust grains tapping softly against Atlas's hull. You close your eyes, listening, letting it wash over you. The chair steadies your heartbeat. The dome of stars steadies your thoughts. And for the first time since setting foot here, you feel not like an intruder or a subject, but simply part of the landscape, a small warm pulse inside a cold, vast silence. You probably won't survive this, not in the practical sense. Humans aren't built for Mars without bubbles and domes and machines that never fail. But survival isn't always the point. Sometimes it's enough just to sit, to breathe in rhythm with a planet, and to know you are here. The stars shimmer, the silence deepens. Atlas hums, steady as a heartbeat, and you, sinking deeper into the chair, surrender softly to the Martian night. And now, as the chamber fades, so does the story. The stars above remain steady and sharp, but they grow softer in your mind, like candles dimming at the end of a long evening. The hum of Atlas becomes less a machine and more a melody, a tone that carries you downward, gently toward rest. The desert you walked, red, endless, haunted with storms and myths, slows its breathing. The dunes no longer shift, the basalt no longer whispers. Even the dust storms, fierce and ancient, dissolve into fine powder that settles quietly, waiting for another day. Everything in this world has exhaled, and you exhale with it. Your body too begins to ease. Shoulders soften, hands unclench. The air you imagine in your lungs grows warmer, thicker, easier. You don't need to chase the next discovery or tug at the next mystery. The planet is vast, the secrets will keep. For tonight, your only task is stillness. You picture the greenhouse again, the basil leaves glistening under gentle mist, the small lemon tree waiting patiently in its soil. You remember the note carved by the door, "Remember to smell the basil." The phrase lingers like a mantra. Small joys, simple comforts, even in the harshest places. That's what sustains us. Above you, the Martian night stretches wider, but the stars blur now, softening into light that doesn't demand your attention. Phobos and Deimos continue their odd little dance, but you no longer track them. You're drifting slower, quieter, floating, weightless between worlds. So let yourself go, let Atlas hum you to sleep, let Mars, stern and silent, cradle you for just a little while. The desert is calm, the night is long, and you are safe here.